Canada was a world leader in introducing business immigration programs. And that was in 1986, Canada introduced the investor category, the entrepreneur categories, and programs didn't really change even after IRPA was introduced in 2002. Quebec always had their own thing going on. They did an investor program. And the way those programs worked were, they reached out, they found business people, and if they invested a certain amount of money, it went from like 200 and then it went up to 400,000. And they'd have to keep the money invested for a certain number of years. A lot of intermediaries got involved and bumped up fees and stuff like that. But the program worked quite well. And then I think due to abuse, and that was probably because of intermediaries and trying to finance the investments and sort of trying to take advantage of the program, the government got their back up and suspended the programs in 2012 and then fully terminated them in 2014. But they were always boutique programs and they brought in really good people. It looks like you want to ask me a question, Deanna.
I do. Were those mostly like passive investment programs? Like they weren't, they were just looking for people who wanted to, like, strictly just to invest. It wasn't that they were looking for people with particular business skills. They were just looking for people with money that they were going to put into existing Canadian
you had to have a
businesses.
business background. It was for business people that allowed them to put money in, not even to a particular project. The investor category was actually an investor category, not in the sense that you got a return for your money, but it was a passive program, and it was known to be a passive program. There was no requirement to do anything other than the background. You had to be a business person with a number of years experience. You could be a senior executive at a company and qualify with your business experience that way. And you would put your money in, and that was it. The entrepreneur category was totally different. That was actually an active. You had to be actively involved. You came in with terms and conditions, and you had to employ, I think it was 2 Canadians, and you had to in a certain period of time, and there was all kinds of restrictions. So the government got out of that game because people came over as permanent residents under that program. And then if they didn't meet their terms and conditions within, I think it was probably 2 years, then they would have to start taking away their permanent residence. And that got really messy. I'm sure you can understand, because they were bringing their spouses, their children. At that point, they owned homes. They were, and a lot of them came over and didn't do business, or they tried to do business and found it really difficult to do business here. So they sort of dropped their families off after a certain while and just went back a lot of times, or back and forth. But the investor category was truly an investor category in the sense of passive. And Quebec still has that program, which opens and closes, still running to this day. And the problem with that is the government collected huge amounts of money and didn't do anything with it. Like they were given, let's say $200,000, $250,000, $400,000. I don't know whatever happened with that money. And I think that's when one of the governments looked at this, and I think it was a conservative government, looked at it and said, no, we don't want to be in the game of buying visas. And but it wasn't really buying visas. They were giving them money. And it's unfortunate that the government never did anything with the money. I mean, I don't see anything wrong with successful business people putting in. You could do it now. You could say, like, put in $1 million, as long as you're not a criminal, as long as you've earned the money, you're a business entrepreneur, we'll take your money and maybe we'll put it into like an infrastructure fund for the country. We'll put it into a healthcare fund. Personally, I don't have a problem with that. Most countries around the world have that type of program. Most of them are real estate based, and you've heard of them in Europe and St. Kitts and in the Caribbean. The Americans have their EB-5 program where they put in, I think it's still $500,000, and they invest in a project. So this is something that's become very popular, and Canada has absolutely gone the other way and just sort of shut it down. I just think they can't be bothered to deal with this type of program.
So I started practicing kind of towards the end of these programs when, you'd mentioned that there was abuse occurring. Had that become more pronounced over time? Like, did it start with a certain type of applicant and people representing, and then it morphed into something less what they were seeking?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of, okay, but this is strictly my opinion. I think once you start getting third parties involved and consultants out there selling projects and doing things, inevitably it leads to the downfall of the program because it just becomes so distorted. And fees are high and, it just goes out of whack. And I think it's funny, it's good, interesting you mentioned that because I think that's probably where the startup visa program is going. That's our current program because it started as a little boutique program for innovators, people that could compete on a world-class level, people that would create jobs for Canadians. Now everybody's got an app. Like you have it being abroad being, just sold and resold and wrapped up in charges and fees and and it's a tiny little program. There's 3,500 spots for I think 2023 and then going up to 5,000 in 2024 and it's taking 37 months to process and
Yeah.
people are paying
Just going back to the investor program. So in British Columbia, I don't know if you know this, Deanna, that when you're driving to the airport and there's that BCIT campus with the planes in it, where the big, like the WestJet plane when you're
Oh,
driving
yeah,
to the
yeah,
airport.
yeah. Okay, I know what you mean.
That's the investor program that loaned and funded the money for that. That's the only thing that I'm aware where investor funds went in BC. There used to be a company called, just pulled it up, the BC Immigrant Investment Fund Limited. And they list the different projects that they funded. And there's a bunch of other ones throughout the province, but that's the big one. So every time I drive past that, I think that's the investor
investors.
program. Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
investor
so I
program.
don't know. What do you think about, passive investment? I mean, again, you have to have the background. It's not for anybody. I inherited $10 million and I want to do it. It's for people with an entrepreneurial or business background.
I think at least so when the understanding that I had was that it was being viewed as a retirement program less than a business immigration program. That's just the sense that I got from it. At least from the people who contacted me, was that it was like, I have a business background and I want to retire. And maybe it would have been different if there was like a language, if there was a stronger language test component, but I always viewed that, yeah, as more of a passive investor program, like with people who were choosing that over the, say, entrepreneur program because they didn't want to run businesses. Although then they closed the entrepreneur program. So that's at
Funny
least the
because
sense I got.
we had a retirement program. I don't know if you know that as well. There was a
No, so
retirement.
what was the retirement program?
It was that. It was like you had enough money to retire and you'd establish a residence and bring your family over. They just wanted people that had assets and could afford to retire in Canada.
So in practice, what was the difference? The retirement program didn't require the
Business
No
5
skills?
years.
intention. Yeah, no intention to establish a business and run a business in Canada.
Okay. The other thing I'd heard as to why they closed the program was that it was based on these 5-year interest-free loans that people would make to the government, and the government would, like in theory, the benefit to the government was they were getting all this money as a loan that they didn't have to pay interest on. But when interest rates went down to like close to zero, it became a question of like, well, is the government even making money on this now, or is it costing more to administer if there's no interest rate savings? And maybe now that interest rates are, depending on how long they stay up, maybe there will be interest again, pardon the pun, in terms of like now that there'd be profits.
But you know what? I don't think it should have been a loan anyways. I thought it always should have been a gift.
Yeah.
Why is the government in the business of giving interest-free loans, right? I think it should have been, put your money in. If you have enough money to qualify and it's not going to cripple you, and you have a business background, just put your money in and that's it. You don't get it back. And there'd be so many people lined up to do that. They'd say, fine, that's the cost of coming over. Happy to do it, right? So I
I
wouldn't want
haven't
to
really thought about this in these terms, but sometimes I'll be consulting someone and they're really essentially refugee claimants, but for the life of them, they don't want to make a refugee claim because of the uncertainty, because of the trauma because they don't want to have to talk about what they face. They know that as soon as they make a refugee claim, they're going to get a removal order against them, and that unless they succeed, that, you know, all of those things. They have the money. If they had the choice of just passively investing that money, even if it's as a gift, they would happily do that, rather than, and many of them have profound business skills. And so for me, if they could choose that rather than going through the refugee process, they would do that in a heartbeat. And to me, if Canada could offer that as an option rather than, and many of them will choose to try immigration programs and economic immigration programs. I think it's a lost opportunity for Canada. It's a lost opportunity for the refugee, because just even the dignity things that put them through a refugee process when they would happily pay to avoid it.
Yeah.
I understand that for some, one of the other issues that I think I understand is that there are always questions in terms of source of funds and just in terms of the challenges of getting funds out of certain states and all of that kind of thing. But if those could be resolved, I don't have any ethical quandary around giving somebody an out that they could use.
I mean, I think like with all
agree.
these programs, I don't know if it's an ethical quandary, but the counter would be like, are there concerns about buying your way in?
Yeah,
Just
I don't
being,
have, yeah,
Yeah, I don't know why that all governments seem to have that concern too. And I mean, I don't know, forget like take off our lawyers' hats, but as Canadians, I don't have a problem. Like set the amount high so everybody can fit in the category. Expand the category. Why is it so tiny? We're bringing in 500,000 immigrants. We can only afford 3,500 spots for business people, startup visa, and self-employed, and together it's ridiculous. It's just too small a program for the demand, right?
yeah.
So
And if somebody could like invest $500,000, put that into the refugee system, and their family comes in, you know, I don't have too much of a problem. Yes, maybe it's buying a visa. I don't think I can get, you know, I wouldn't, I wouldn't be too bothered by that, honestly.
yeah, I agree. Like, and I mean, I guess you could frame it not buying a visa, it's investing in Canada, and
Social
you
enterprise.
have the right background to invest in Canada, right? So, yeah, I think
yeah.
it's the way. I don't know why the governments feel that this is something that they can't do, other than Quebec, of course, because Quebec has maintained
That's
the
what Beck
investor
does,
program on
yeah.
and off. They don't have a problem with it, right?
But I think so the stats like when I think it was, I can't remember if it was Kenny or Chris Alexander who terminated the investor program. I think it was Alexander because I vaguely remember him talking about it when he was on the podcast. Was they had that stat that the investor immigrants were paying less income taxes than refugee claimants, although they had invested all this money. Um, but then that's, you know, there's
No, no,
other
I
issues
think
there with
that's a
how the
legitimate
taxes work.
point. I mean,
Yeah.
but not in a good, not that I support the government on that. I would say, you know what? If you come in that category, let's say where you've put money in, you should also be obligated. First of all, you have the residency obligations.
Mhm.
You know, and that should also be something that, you know, you have to pay taxes. Like you should have to declare your assets, declare income, and pay taxes in order to maintain your status or something like that. You think you could tie it into taxes if you wanted to.
Yeah, well, I think they were indirectly because part like what were they called? The astronauts, where there'd be in the
Yeah.
investor who would be in like generally China at the time, and their family here. And because we tax people as individuals, the family here that lived in a mansion wouldn't have to pay taxes because the investor is overbroad or overseas. And I think at one point even they were even looking at like now doing taxation based on family, but that kind of went nowhere. But so that's sort of the history. Now, if we look at where we are now, if someone came to you and said, I want to start a business in Canada, or I'm here as a foreign worker on an open work permit running a business, what options do they have?
Okay, well, the first option I look at is not a business category. Okay, that's the first assessment I do is, do you speak French? What does your wife do or your spouse do? You know, look at every possibility other than business programs, because really the startup visa program and the self-employed are the only direct paths to permanent residence. I mean, every provincial, and then you're stuck with provincial nomination programs.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can probably tell me more about the BC programs. I know in Ontario, it's been the most underutilized, insignificant program, I think, of any of the programs. I think the numbers, you look at them, you may have had like 3 people going through in a year, 2 people
Yeah,
going
that's
through
less
in a
than
year.
here.
It's crazy. And just, I think yesterday, a couple of days ago, they paused the entire entrepreneur program in Ontario. So, and the other ones are all coming in on work permits and, so what you have to do is look at all possibilities, what PNPs are available, where do they have family ties? A lot of times, don't forget to ask, like, where would you like to settle? Where are you thinking of settling, instead of me saying, well, what about Alberta, or what about, BC?
Yeah. So
Because,
BC, there were 34 people nominated in 2022.
yeah, so
So
really
very
limited.
small. But so like we should address the main issue. So like why wouldn't an entrepreneur who's worked in Canada on their business just go through express entry in the Canadian experience class?
Well, they don't get points, number one, for Canadian work experience.
Yeah.
A lot of times with people in that category, the age knocks them out of express entry, because a lot of times they'll be in their late 30s or 40s. Language is always an issue a lot of times with people that, fit that profile, that are
Yeah.
starting businesses or have businesses. Funny you ask, because we're actually just putting in a proposal from the Ontario Bar Association to the Ontario government about something called the Ontario Business Economic Entrepreneur Class, which we have recycled because we've tried to use this for the Canadian government, I think, for the past 10 years, where basically you say, if you have run a business in Canada, let's say you came as a spouse on an open work permit for a student, or, it doesn't have to be employer specific work permit. If you have set up a business, if you have employed Canadians for a certain period of time, if you have basic language skills, then you should be pulled. You should have a separate category to pull you for the Canada Business Experience class or the BC
Yeah.
Business. I mean, you've already put your money where your mouth is. I'm doing it, right? Whereas a lot of these entrepreneur programs are looking forward, like, oh, will you be able to set up a business? Come in on a 2-year work
That's
permit.
what BC's is like. They don't count what you've already done.
I know, is that
What's
weird?
the
Like, they don't
history
count what you've
behind
done.
why self-employment doesn't count in Canada? Like what,
Under the ministerial instructions for express entry, you just don't get points for
but
self-employment.
is there a reason why they developed it that way?
I think
Because
so. I
foreign
think they're always
self-employment
suspicious.
counts, Canadian doesn't, has always been sort of a weird just distinction. And if anything, you'd think you'd be more suspicious of foreign self-employment.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
it's that they just can't
exactly.
assess it. Yeah, I think it's just that we've talked about this so many times in different ways on the show, is that there's this presumption of fraud, and if they don't have any third party to rely on to verify the period of employment, they assume that it's cheat, and so that's why it's just easier for them to assess a T4. It's easier for them to assess a record of employment. It's easier for them to look at a big company issuing a letter on letterhead. As soon as it's a letter from you about you, they just are like, I'm going to presume that this is inauthentic. It's lazy. Anyways, this is me getting hot-headed, but I think it's just easier to do a conventional employer-employee relationship and self-employment. That's always that's my conspiracy theory, put it that way.
No, I agree with you. I just think they just assume if you say you're self-employed, you must be lying about something. And I've seen one where I saw a dentist who came in, and she worked on a contract with a dental office, and she was self-employed. That's just the way they structured the deal, and they do that with a lot of professionals. And she had gone into express entry, and they refused her. They wouldn't accept her self-employed experience for employment in Canada, even though it was clear she was working as a dentist. She was getting paid as a dentist, but because it was under a contract where they didn't deduct taxes, they refused her. So that's how ridiculous.
And they've had to do a specific carve out recently for the doctors who work for provincial health authorities, which it's crazy actually how long that took.
Yeah, but there's so many industries that are like this. Like it's the same with the film industry where, so many people just work on deal memos. It's the same for geologists, I discovered through some strange application, I mean, even many lawyers, I think there's probably a good half of lawyers who they practice on a self-employed basis
Oh yeah, that's a
essentially.
good point.
You know, so yeah, I think it's just I don't know exactly where it came from, but here we are.
Yeah. The other thing that I look at with people, let's say they came over C11, which is for business people that want to set up a business in Canada, C10, significant benefits, intercompany transfers under C12. If people are over and running a business and they come over on the work permit, then I've been successful in getting 200 points for them, depending on the position, for arranged employment under express entry, and hopefully that will continue. But even now with 200 bonus points, if you're a senior position and in your own business, it's not enough points to get qualified now, because I don't know if you've looked at the
Oh,
express,
the points are
like 560, 550. So even these people that are running their own businesses and getting the 200 bonus points can't qualify. So there's not a lot of options for business people, which I really think is horrible. It's just not acceptable.
it's
The thing that I
very
find a little
weird.
ironic too is that, well, something that makes perfect sense from a business strategy perspective, from a tax planning perspective, is disadvantageous from an immigration perspective. So you would go to your business lawyer, to your tax lawyer, they say, oh, this is how to structure your business, but you have to decline all that advice in order to not put yourself out of the running for permanent residency. That's the kind of nonsense that I feel like people are trying to wrap their heads around right now.
And even doing that now, with the recent draws, like since the summertime, they're not going to qualify anyway. So they've gone through all this gymnastics, and it's just like, sorry, you're not qualified yet. So what are the options when you're here running a business and you just don't qualify for anything? Again, so obviously look at the spouse, but you have to keep extending their status. Like they just have to keep running the business, and hopefully a category opens up.
And in that interim, hopefully they don't get refused on the basis that they've all of a sudden gotten a permanent intention instead of temporary, because they keep extending and extending and waiting.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because at any point you can get an officer that says, okay, enough is enough. You've been here for 5 years, 4 years running a business.
Yeah.
11 is not supposed to be permanent, but you don't have a category to go into, right?
In the
So
self-employed class, it's not clear. Well, that's limited to culture and athletics,
yeah, at a
and nothing's
world-class
happening
level.
at a world-class level. So it's something we've talked about on the podcast before. I'm curious to know where you think it's heading, Robin, like the gap between the number of people coming on work permits and how hard it is to now qualify for permanent residence, unless you speak intermediate French. So like
Yeah.
where do you think it's heading? Because it felt like the gap was getting really large. Then there was a COVID pandemic that kind of leveled things out. And now it's just shot back up. They like basically has admitted so many temporary residents to basically get back to where they were in terms of this gap. Where is it heading?
Well, I think that what they're going to do is they've announced they're cracking down on the student visa program, because again, a lot of abuse going on there. So if they really tighten up designated learning institutions and really have legitimate schools on there, not a lot of these, in my opinion, a lot of these private schools that are strictly turning out international students to, and a lot of them aren't even eligible for postgraduate work permits, but that whole industry has to be reined in. I don't think they've done enough yet by just saying you have to have more money for the international student. I think they have to actually go to each province, and it's on my list of things to do, to go to the province of Ontario, the Ministry of Education, say, how do you become a designated learner? How do you become accredited in the province? Like, what is the criteria? How is it that ABC Global or ABC 123 in a mall in Brampton is a legitimate school? So I think every province has to do that, or the Fed said, we're going to crack down. I don't know how they're doing that, but that's not to clean up the mess that's been created, but maybe going forward to try and rein in the number of international students for the schools that shouldn't really be on that list. I don't think it should affect proper schools, but
Yeah.
it may tighten that up. Maybe they have to give longer postgraduate work permits, maybe more points for Canadian experience. I mean, I'm really a believer in if you're here working and you're doing it, you should get priority over people that are abroad.
No,
You know,
I'm the
I
same.
always had a problem.
There's a I don't know if you know Kubir. He's an immigration consultant with a huge YouTube channel, and a lot of his audience is in India. And every time I go on his show, I say that I wouldn't do any invitations for people who are outside Canada as long as there are still possible, people who could do CEC. And it's probably one of the only times I get hate mail.
Yeah, but you know what? Like,
like,
those people that the Canada Experience class people, they're here. They've
yeah,
invested in education. They're here on work permits. Like, I unfortunately, because we just can't let everybody in. If you're going to limit it, then limit it to the people that are here. International student visas, I would make sure they're a minimum of 2-year programs at legitimate schools. Same with the work permits if they've been here working. Why are they doing general draws? Why aren't they doing draws just for CEC?
yeah,
Why aren't they doing draws, giving more points for Canadian work experience and Canadian education? It's minimal. Like, why you're getting hardly any points, for these factors that are fundamental.
yeah.
So the other thing is that the government is supposed to be revamping the temporary foreign worker program. What that means, I don't know at this stage. I don't know if you've heard anything about that.
Yeah, I mean, the minister has commented that, yeah, rein it in, I think, were his exact words. I don't know. I have no idea what he means.
Yeah, I don't know either. So, oh, there you go.
Yeah. I find that this minister, compared to previous ones, almost makes like statements as if it's testing the waters to see what the public response will be. Because sometimes it seems like they'll almost say like two contradictory things in the same day. Like, I don't see a world in which we reduce the immigration level. We're open to everything as long to get housing under control. It's hard to know where the government plans on going. So the Ontario business immigrant, so it's really small. Um, and is it expression of interest like it is in BC where all the businesses are ranked against? Yeah.
Yeah, and they have to come up with a performance agreement and a business plan. And they even had another category called the OINP Success Initiative. So they retained an organization to go out and try and bring in business people from around the world and try and get them to it was $200,000 outside the GTA, right? So get them outside of Toronto area. And I don't even think that was successful because when I just checked the website before, it looks like that one's been archived as well. So, there you are, like $200,000 to go into outside the GTA. They couldn't even fill that. So the problem with the OINP is you're in an expression of interest. You don't know whether you get pulled or not pulled. You do get pulled. Then you got to go prove your money. So you have to go one of the accounting companies that they tell you have to go to get your assets assessed for proof of funds and providence of funds.
Yeah.
And then, if you're lucky enough at some point, you'll get a nomination to come in and do a 2-year work permit. And then you have to meet all the terms of your performance agreement within, I think it's 18 months or 20 months. And then you can apply for permanent residence if you do all that. So you're looking at, when we calculated, usually it's like 3 or 4 years to go through that program. So if there were any faster program, there were faster programs. It was through Express Entry. If you had got the 200 arranged employment points, or it was under startup visa, used to be 12 months, now it's 37 months. But, and now they just suspended the Ontario program, which was becoming more attractive because everything else was so lousy, and they just suspended it. So, I'm on the executive I chair a committee for the Ontario Bar Association dealing with the OINP, and we are actually putting in submissions next week to head
I
up.
have a OIMP question that so coming from BC, there's regular draws for general skilled workers. And I don't do a lot of Ontario OIMP, but what has astounded me, although it hasn't impacted any of my files really, but like what has astounded me is it seems like there hasn't been a general OIMP draw for like 2 years or a year and a half without explanation or even a heads up that that was happening. Like, is the OIMP always that unpredictable? And like, did lawyers in Ontario get like a heads up that maybe I just wasn't aware of, hey,
No, no,
we're
no,
not
no,
going to
we
be
get
like doing
nothing.
invites. So
We get
yeah, like
nothing.
I don't, so what have companies been doing in Ontario where like a program just kind of just stops?
Yeah, well, and people are languishing in these pools, like the employer job offer stream. So you have senior executives that just can't qualify under express entry due to age, due to some education, maybe never going to qualify. And they used to be the ones that would get picked up, and same with a lot of trades would get picked up. So yeah, so they started. Your timing is right. Probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, they just started doing targeted draws. I guess during COVID, only targeted draws, and they haven't changed. And they do a lot of French draws. And then it could be French and targeted. So you not only have to be a healthcare worker, but you have to be have proficiency in French. So, and they keep targeting the same people that they're laying off. Like, you hear about layoffs in the tech industry and they're busy. That's who they're targeting, people in the tech industry, STEM, which is fine, but maybe adjust it a little bit to, deal with the current circumstances. Trades always get shafted in every program, I think federally and provincially as well. The trades that they pull have to go through express entry, and you can see the points are so ridiculous. Even with a 200 point nomination, you're just not going to get pulled if your points are 200 points, and then plus the nomination of 50 points or whatever, you just can never get pulled, right?
No, that killed me when they announced that, hey, we've done our first trades draw in express entry. And I was just looking at it going, there's literally a federal skilled trades program that you guys just don't use. Like, I don't know why we had to create a whole new program.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have, so British Columbia, the PMP here doesn't have a Francophone program yet. I think it's something that there needs to be a conversation as to whether given that it's a zero-sum game, whether prioritizing Francophones who are destined to work outside of Quebec in jobs that don't require French is the best use of allocation. I feel like I'm going to get some pushback
I
and
don't
flack on
disagree.
this, but like, I don't know. I don't, given all the needs for different, like when you look at the express entry categories, trades, okay, I can see that. STEM, sure. Francophone, where there's no French component to their work here. I am not convinced it's the best allocation of spots.
I sort of, my husband's a writer, and so sometimes I think about things in terms of like a writer's room. And when you have like a whole bunch of people around the table and everyone has an idea, and you can see those ideas, like when you're watching a movie or a television episode, you can see all of the different ideas around the table come in. But when nobody has had like a singular mind that figures out how all of these things work together in the system, you can still end up with an entirely incoherent film or an entirely incoherent television episode. So while the idea of tradespeople, the idea of business skills, the idea of trying to bring people out to the various regions outside of the big urban centers, all of these ideas, I can understand how any government is like, these are the things we wish to achieve overall, makes sense. But because there are so many, and this is something we've talked about repeatedly on the program, because we are seeing so many different program design initiatives, and even within IRCC, the department is so divided up into different departments and different initiatives. And I just feel like none of them are really fully speaking together. We have such an incoherent program design. And so we can talk until we're blue in the face about who's being missed and what's happening and all this kind of stuff. We all have examples from our own practice of people that we just can't in any way understand why this particular client or this particular applicant has absolutely no option to immigrate, or why they can't even extend their permit. There's no policy rationale for why this person cannot remain in Canada. And I think that that's what we're all struggling with as practitioners. And we're trying to figure out ways of expressing it. We're talking about it in theoretical terms. But I think if we went around the table here and we came up with the case that's like the most absurd, I think it would really illustrate the point that we're trying to make here.
Yeah, I think that's the most intelligent thing said on a podcast with a dog on someone's lap.
Yeah, and,
Well,
look at your hand.
and a
look at
big
your-
milestone for the podcast too, having the dog now, because like I feel like the yoga YouTube channels, there's always a dog. Going back to what you were saying, so Robin, the Ontario, the proposal for the Canada Business class, what would it look like? And if there is the fraud concern, like how would that be addressed through the program that the OBA is proposing?
Okay, well, just to let you know, it was a CBA initiative, and we're
Yeah.
recycling it because I've tried to put it forward to the government, federal government, so many years. They all just say, yeah, that's a good idea, and they never do anything with it. So we said, all right, let's send it to Ontario. We'll call it the Ontario Entrepreneur Business Class. So the idea was, and the criteria can change, if you set up a qualifying business, and that would have to be defined, and if you've run that business for, let's say, a year or maybe 2 years, and if you've employed Canadians and you can objectively provide proof of that, and add in whatever criteria you have, and you go into an expression of interest pool, maybe, I don't think it would go through express entry. And they go in there and they pick people that have a proven track record of running businesses and employing Canadians. And they could even put criteria if they're outside the GTA, inside the GTA, maybe more job creation. So they could do that. But instead of looking forward and saying, oh, you're not here yet, will you be able to do that in the future? They're looking backwards and saying, okay, you're here and you've done it and you've had status and you've been, as I said, it could be an open work permit on a spouse's postgraduate work permit or on a student visa, or it could be a free trade work permit, IEC. As long as they're here legally and have been doing it, like those seem to me or to us to be the best people to keep here because they're
So would
already
it be just done through tax filings, or what would, like, if they are concerned about fraud, is it through verifiable T4s? Like, what would be
you could have T4s, you could have CRA documents, your 125s or whatever you file with federally and provincially, and proof that you're paying taxes. It could be an accountant's letter, proper chartered CPA, and your T4s, T4 summaries, identification for the people that you're employing, the positions that you're employing them in. I think it's easy to document, right? And to me, they're people that are here. So when you're talking about there's so many people here that can't transition, why are we looking out and saying, oh, let's bring that person in, let's bring this person in, when they're already here doing this? And you're saying, no, because under the Ontario program, they wouldn't let you go into that entrepreneur program if you've been running your business for, let's say, they made up a number, a year or more. So they arbitrarily excluded people that had actually been here. So it just doesn't make sense. So I don't know, what does BC do? Tell me about, I hear about.
It's similar. I mean, it's so niche. Like BC is basically, there's kind of divided the same as, I guess, Ontario. It's the Vancouver, there's thresholds if it's Vancouver, which is the base entrepreneur program, and then there's a regional entrepreneur program. There's it's business experience requirement, investment requirement, job creation requirement. But kind of like you, like, and it sounds like in Ontario, I generally avoid it just because it's forward looking. You have to get the province's approval before you start. And then you're locked into these performance agreements that generally, if someone is going to make the commitments required for the PMP entrepreneur program, I feel like they would get the 200 points in express entry. Now it may be different now that the points threshold is so high for express entry, but I don't see the PMP business category meeting that gap. There's also really niche that I've never done, community-based programs, but it's such a small allocation.
What about like the draws that they're doing in BC for people that are there working? Like how is that working?
It's high. So the big change that was done in BC, I want to say, I can't remember if it was 2022 or 2023, was they used to do points largely in part based on the skill of the job. So if it was knock 00 or tier 00, that would be worth more points. An engineer, for example, would get more points than a retail food supervisor. They got rid of all that, and it's prioritized now essentially on wage, where the wage threshold's high. Like to get the top number of points, you have to be earning 150 or above.
Really?
Yeah, and you get very few. It's basically a six-figure program.
Really? So that's how
Yeah.
but then they're missing out a lot of they'd be missing out all the trades.
Oh,
Well,
trades
unless
have,
you're in a
well, unless
drywall
there's,
installer.
so there are specific, let me check now, the specific categories, because I get confused with the
Because we always hear
federal
basically, oh,
program,
just
but
work there for 6 months and then you can go
so
into.
that was it until the recent changes. There's also a big impact now on if you graduated from outside of Vancouver and if you're working from outside of Vancouver. And when the changes were announced, I actually like tried to run the math and I said, okay, graduating at say UVic and working on the island is worth something like $50,000 in the wage grids. But they also have, yeah, so there's a construction, there's specific draws for childcare, construction, healthcare, veterinary care, early
STEM.
childhood educator, yeah, and the tech draws.
Yeah.
But
So
are they
they've
You also
just
also
get
regular
gone, so
points
the
draws?
general
for,
points are high now. But I think more important than the general points being high is the reallocation of points away from skill level of job to wage, with the wage threshold going way up, and uh, region of employment. So
So
BC is less, well, if you're outside of Vancouver, we get just a lot of points.
okay. So you
it
can
used to
get
be that if
points
you'd
for
been
that.
educated in Canada, you were working in your employer, in the job, you were working, you'd been there for a year, that would sort of tip the balance. But now it's kind of being tipped so that salary is just really, it tips the balance. You
But
really need
how
to
does
be.
it work with the ones you said, like the construction trade, the educators they're a separate category. So how does that work?
So they're just the points, it's kind of like express entry. They input all the same information, but the number of points needed is less. And there's this list of 25 basically all the construction, anything starting with tier 7 that's skilled, has a lower points threshold. But it kind of goes to what you were saying before, though, how like they all keep targeting the same people. So there's express entry, construction specific draws, there's PMP, construction specific draws. Everyone, and I don't think it's that uncommon that while you're waiting for your PMP application to be approved, we'll just get an express entry invitation and then withdraw the provincial nominee application, which is, I don't know, it seems a bit of a waste that they're all going after the same people.
Yeah, that seems to be a consistent problem with all the programs. And then you mentioned outside the rural programs where you have to get community support, and those are so niche and so boutique. We have the rural and northern immigration program, which, it's not just for Ontario. There's a bunch of northern communities. I don't think I know anybody that's ever gotten through on that. So the options are limited. So it's becoming much more
But
complicated.
it's good for like, I mean, so for them, I'm sure they're like, well, the politics, we can respond to things quick. Oh, well, this is what they do federally. It's like every express entry invitation that's category specific is a press release going, we got a housing shortage. We just invited 1,000 people to build houses. Oh, the doctor, like that seems to be where they're heading with these category draws. I thought there was going to be a Ukraine draw initially. I was wrong about that.
But even the points for the if you look at the category, the points are still high.
Yeah.
It's not like they're 200, 300. They're like the mid to high 400s for a lot of these. Even for construction, for transportation, they're in the high 400s.
Yeah, it's
Which truck drivers are getting 480 points? Like I don't understand.
no, it's well, where's, yeah, even for, I was about to say, well, yeah, it's all four. I remember when yeah, when the baseline for express entry dipped to 415. And now it's in the 550s. I don't know. I really don't know where, like, there's going to be so many people who come here and can't stay that
It has to be multiple years of Canadian experience, really. Like, I mean,
Well, you don't get
otherwise
that
it's
many extra points for like Canadian experience.
No, you don't. Like
And
1 to
it
2
doesn't
years is
offset
nothing.
age for sure. And it won't like, it's very weird to me that there is no kind of catch-all program for like the CEC applicants who are kind of falling through the cracks, who have been here working for years and they're getting picked, kind of like Robin was saying, after people who have never been here, where you're not even sure if it will or will not work out for someone who's never been here.
And you raise
Especially
a
with,
good point, because the more Canadian work experience they get, the older they're getting. So they're losing points at 30 under express entry. So they have to raise that. I always had a problem with at 30 start losing points, because anybody who goes to school, does a master's degree, they're just really, a lot of them are starting their careers in their late 20s, right? So to start penalizing them at 30 is ridiculous, right?
yeah,
So
when I was younger, I didn't have a problem with it. As I'm getting older and I'm no longer getting max points, I'm starting to see the annoyance.
yeah.
I
So
agree with you. I also wonder, like, how many of those in their 30s actually know where they're going to stay for good. You know, I think those that are sort of in the higher age groups, like if they are applying for permanent residency, it may well be that they're actually intending to stay here for good. Whereas if you're applying for permanent residency in your 30s, that doesn't necessarily mean you're committed to remaining in Canada. It might just be a stopping
maybe
point.
bonus points for 40 plus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, especially with housing where you can immigrate, not afford to live here. And then there's all these reports now of people going back.
Well, I mean, it takes us back to what can be done. And I think the government really has to focus on trying to clear out the people that are here, instead of reaching abroad, and, really adjusting points to take into consideration people that are successfully established in Canada, and trying to clear them out, and trying to clear up the schools and clear up all the fraud that goes on abroad. Like the whole thing with international students is just despicable, what's going on with these education consultants and the consultants, and all the promotion of schools, and the misrepresentations to these people bringing their kids here.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like 2023 was the year where the immigration consensus in Canada started to really crack.
Mm-hmm.
And I think 2024 will be the year of the political repercussions for it.
The thing that I find so tragic about that is that people being taken advantage of are now being vilified too, because I think that there's a total lack of sympathy that's happening. And now, what we were talking about earlier with that assumption being made that sort of guilty until proven innocent. The dog is really not doing me any favors today, but it's leading to such a high rate of refusal at visa offices, even when it is a truly genuine application. And having an applicant have to prove the genuineness is becoming an incredible burden.
Yes, for students. Yeah, and there's just a lot of, there's a lot of fraud going on abroad with these, people helping people apply to different schools, and the schools collaborating. It's just despicable, what's going on. And
agreed. But I feel like the idea, like what you're saying, is sort of shifting the onus back onto the Canadian government. It's on you to do that vetting, because and Steve and I have talked about this, about, that the jurisprudence has sort of said, okay, students, you need to be doing your due diligence. But how is a student viably supposed to be doing their due diligence when they're there? They can't come and walk into and see that the ABC 123 is in a mall. How are they supposed to legitimately be doing that due diligence? Whereas the Canadian government is fully equipped to be figuring out which ones are the appropriate DLIs that should have these privileges, and that the others should not.
Yeah, that was that case where when they were like, oh yeah, there was no due diligence done to verify if this letter of acceptance was real. And it's like, really? When I went on exchange, I didn't contact the university in Europe to go, hey, can you just confirm me if everything's been fake so far? Like, nobody does that.
Are you a real school?
Yeah, exactly. Are you a real school? Are you a puppy mill equivalent for education? Yeah, it's.
Well, the government has announced that as a priority between, you know, cleaning up student visas. So I guess time will tell, and we'll see if they actually do something other than penalizing the students.
I think that's going to be the theme of the year. Time will tell.
Time will tell, yeah.
Yeah. Looking at the clock, this has been fun. Definitely, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where the proposal goes for this new, because it is very weird that there is no, like, there's no mainstream business program. And I guess we haven't mentioned, like, outside of the startup visa program, which requires that you go through a business incubator or an angel investor. And if you're a business that doesn't need incubation or a financial investment, right now there aren't really business programs.
No, and you know, I see what's going on again with the marketing with this program. They're supposed to be for innovators, and they're putting, you can have up to 5 people in basically a project, and people are being matched together. And at first it looked like that was an okay idea, but the more that time has gone on, I see that not as being the best way to go. It should just be, you know, people that are in business together or plan a business together, or it makes sense to be together. But this
Can you
program,
imagine being matched with business partners? Like, honestly, for anything, it's like, I mean,
dating
again, yeah, honestly, and like then trying to work through whether or not you're actually suitably matched while going through an immigration process together. It's like, yeah,
Or
that
if
just
one
sounds,
person fails, everyone fails.
Yeah, and that's what happened.
yeah.
See, when
Yeah.
they started doing this matching, it was processing times took 12 months. So, you know, you could be matched, you go through an incubation program for 3 to 4 months, you know, you're becoming a permanent resident. People's lives are not going off in different directions like they are now, where it's taking 37 months.
Yeah.
And, you know, let's say you've been, you know, put a lot of money into this, because it is costing people a lot of money, sometimes in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per person in that business. And, you know, towards the end, somebody says, you know what, I'm going to the States. I already got my, you know, EB-5. I have no interest in going to Canada. Or somebody gets refused, you all go down. You know, it's like you all go down.
It's like getting a
By
couple
10.
married, giving them 3 kids, and then sending them to a conflict zone together.
Yeah, yeah. So it's
That's
just
funny.
not a good idea.
It's a terrible idea.
And the program is, you know, I always think of it as like a bathtub. It's like the taps are open, but at some point you're overflowing and you're going to have to slam the doors closed. So I don't know how they're going to do that.
I think we should ask our friend Nicholas Kyung at the Toronto Star to write an article saying Canada is no longer doing business.
I like that idea. Let's contact Nicholas. You know, what happened to Canada's, you know, entrepreneurial and, you know, entrepreneurial spirit, you know? I that's a good one.